In this video, I want to tell the story of the woman who broke Arthur Morgan's heart, a woman he loved for years, who even accepted his marriage proposal, who more than once had the chance to run away with him and start a new life, and yet never managed to stay by his side. In the Red Dead 2 end credits, there's a scene that perfectly sums up this tragedy. Mary Linton appears in front of Arthur's grave, silently, alone, crying. But to understand how their story ended this way, we need to go back way before the events of the game, because most of this story doesn't even happen during Red Dead 2. It's hidden in letters, in dialogues, in details that go unnoticed, and in events Rockstar never shows the player. Today we're going to piece together the entire relationship between Arthur and Mary, from the start of their romance, through the engagement, the breakup, reunions, and goodbyes, analyzing letters, hidden lines, gang members' opinions, Rockstar behind the scenes info, and details most players never caught. So grab something to eat, sit on the couch, and get ready, because this video isn't just Mary Linton's story, it's also the story of how Arthur Morgan lost the woman he loved most in life. The relationship between Arthur Morgan and Mary Linton started long before 1899, and although the game never exactly reveals when they met, we know they had a relationship that lasted years and was way more serious than just a youthful fling. Arthur and Mary were deeply in love. At some point their relationship progressed to an engagement. Arthur actually asked Mary to marry him and she said yes. Then they both shared the dream of building a life together and starting a family. But while their bond was strong, the same couldn't be said for Arthur's relationship with Mary's family. Her father, Mr. Gillis, never approved of the relationship. In his eyes, Arthur was just a criminal with no future, a man unable to provide stability, security, or a decent life for his daughter. That's why for years he discouraged Mary from investing in that relationship. But not everyone in the family felt the same way. Mary's younger brother, Jaime Gillis, was extremely close to Arthur. Back then, Jaime was just a kid, and Arthur saw him almost like a brother. They spent a lot of time together, and it was Arthur himself who taught Jaime how to ride a horse, which was a big deal back then. It was the kind of bond you don't build overnight. Arthur wasn't just part of Mary's life, he was part of the family, but even that wasn't enough to save their relationship. Over the years, things between Arthur and Mary started to fall apart. Part of it came from her father's constant disapproval, but there was an even bigger problem: Arthur's own lifestyle. Mary knew the gang, knew Dutch, knew about the crimes, and above all, she believed Arthur could be more than that. She dreamed that one day he'd leave that life behind, find an honest job, and build with her the future they both imagined when they got engaged. Arthur, on the other hand, saw the situation differently. He didn't want to leave Mary, but he also didn't want to leave the gang. He believed he could balance both worlds, keep being who he was, and at the same time build a life with the woman he loved. The problem was that Mary didn't see that as an option. To her, as long as Arthur stayed tied to that outlaw life, there was never going to be a future for them, and that's exactly where their relationship started to fall apart. Because Arthur and Mary didn't break up for lack of love, they broke up because they wanted different futures. Mary wanted to build a new life, and Arthur just couldn't let go of the old one. The breakup hit Arthur hard, and it got so clear that even some gang members started forming opinions about Mary. During our walks around the camp, we could hear plenty of conversations about her.
Did you see that woman, Mary Gillis, about?
Yes. Yes, I did.
I never liked her.
I know, you already told me that.
Ideas above her station. Above anyone's station, that one. Hey, how have you been, Arthur?
Fine, Mary Beth.
You see that Mary Gillis?
Sure. I saw her.
Get over her, Arthur.
Oh, it was all a long time ago.
Oh. I hope so.
Hey, I hear Mary's been seen again.
Sure.
Well, I always thought, well, she seems real nice.
She had better ideas than me. She ain't the only one.
As we can see, Abigail is practically the only person who seems to understand Mary's side, given that she's dealing with the same dilemma with John. The other women, however, see things differently. To them, Mary was the one who broke Arthur's heart, and maybe that's exactly why, after the breakup, Arthur seems to give up on any hope of a new great love, also carrying the weight of Eliza's and his son Isaac's deaths. He decided to keep moving forward, but more and more immersed in gang life and the world he had chosen for himself. Mary, on the other hand, rebuilt her life. Sometime after the breakup, she married a man named Mary Linton and started using her husband's last name. We know very little about this marriage. The game never reveals how long they stayed together or what their relationship was like, and so for a few years, each went their own way. Arthur stayed with the gang and Mary tried to move on. But no matter how much time passed, some stories just refused to end. In 1899, after hearing about the trouble the gang caused in Valentine, Mary found out Arthur was nearby, and after years without any contact, she made a decision that would change everything. She picked up a pen and wrote again to the man she never managed to forget. However, that letter wasn't just an attempt to reconnect, it was a cry for help, and Arthur was about to find out that some people, no matter how much time goes by, still have the power to completely change the course of our lives. During her stay in town, Mary met with some of the gang's women and handed over a letter to be delivered to Arthur. Despite the rocky relationship between them and the bad impression many had of Mary since the breakup, the request was honored. The letter ended up in Arthur's tent waiting to be read, and when we finally open that letter, we find a woman clearly torn between pride and need. Right from the first lines, Mary admits she wrote that message countless times, struggling to find the right words. She recalls the last time they spoke when she was about to get married and said she would never reach out to him again. Back then, she believed that would be the final chapter of their story, but life, of course, had other plans. She admits she never imagined she'd be writing to Arthur again, but also acknowledges she wasn't proud enough to ignore people who once cared about her. And that line says way more than it seems, because even after all these years, Mary still saw Arthur as someone important in her life, someone she could trust, someone who, in a way, kept holding a place that time never fully erased. Mary explains that she had been living in Valentine for a few months, and when she found out Arthur was in the area, she wanted to see him again. The interesting thing is that she never reveals the real reason for the letter. At no point does she explain what happened, nor does she say what the problem is. She just asks to meet him. And maybe that's exactly what makes this letter so compelling, because even after years without any contact, even after the engagement ended and everything that happened between them, Mary still believed Arthur would answer her call, and she was right. Just a few handwritten lines were enough for Arthur to drop everything he was doing and ride out to Chadwick's farm, and for the first time in many years, he was about to reunite with the woman he once believed would be his wife. When he arrives at the farm, Arthur finally reunites with Mary after years without seeing her, and just watching the first few seconds of their conversation, you can tell there's something between them that never fully went away. Both show some nervousness. Arthur can barely hide his discomfort seeing her again, while Mary seems to be searching for the right words. It's a meeting between two people who were once incredibly important to each other, but now carry years of distance, regrets, and unfinished business. During the conversation, Arthur learns something he didn't know when he got the letter. The man Mary married is dead. Mary Linton passed away some time ago, victim of pneumonia, leaving Mary a widow. The news clearly catches him off guard. Arthur expresses his condolences for Barry's death and for a few moments seems to understand why she came looking for him right now. After all, after so many years without contact, after the marriage and everything that happened between them, why was she there? But the answer comes right after. Mary then explains the real reason she sent the letter. She reveals she needs help, not for herself, but for her family, and that's when the tone of the conversation shifts completely. Arthur immediately shows some resentment. He recalls that Mary's family always looked down on him, always saw him as unworthy, and never accepted his relationship with her, and when he finds out the request involves those very people who spent years looking at him with disdain, it's clear that part of him feels hurt. Throughout the conversation, Arthur lets that pain slip out. He remembers never being seen as good enough, that his life, his money, and even himself were never accepted by them, and the way he talks, you can tell that wound never fully healed. Still, Mary keeps pushing. She asks for help, asks for understanding, and lets slip something that might be one of the most important lines of the whole reunion. She admits she thinks about Arthur often, a simple statement but packed with meaning, because even after all those years, neither of them managed to completely erase the other from their lives. This is the moment when Mary finally explains why she sent the letter. Her younger brother Jaime had gone missing after getting involved with a religious group known as the Colonians. Mary believes he was in danger and was desperate to find him. According to her, Arthur was the only person Jaime would still listen to, and here the game puts an interesting choice in the player's hands. We can refuse to help Mary or we can accept her request. Technically, both options exist, but there's an almost unanimous consensus within the community that the canonical choice is to help, not just because the mission flows more naturally that way, but simply because it doesn't fit the Arthur we know to ignore a request coming from Mary, especially when it involves Jaime, someone she has always cared about.
Where is it?
Somewhere out near Carmody Dell, I think. The rancher there said he'd seen him around the Cumberland Forest. I just want him back, Arthur. If you find him, bring him to me at the station.
I'll see what I can do.
I'll owe you.
You already owe me.
In the end, Arthur gives in, maybe out of concern for the boy, maybe out of concern for Mary herself, or maybe because deep down he never really learned to say no to her. After getting the info about Jaime's whereabouts, Arthur hops on his horse and heads toward Cumberland Forest, not knowing that this search would lead him to one of the most unusual rescues of his entire journey. When he arrives at the spot Mary pointed out, Arthur finds Jaime among the Colonians, a religious sect that believes in rejecting worldly pleasures. They seek a purer spiritual existence, almost like a complete renunciation of ordinary life. As he approaches the group, Arthur quickly realizes Jaime is way more involved with their philosophy than he thought. The kid shows no interest in going back home and insists he's finally found his path. Arthur tries to talk him into having a conversation, and depending on the player's choices, the approach can be friendlier or more aggressive, but the outcome is the same. Jaime refuses to listen. To him, Arthur represents exactly the kind of person who never found purpose in life. For Arthur, those men are nothing but opportunists, taking advantage of a lost young guy's vulnerability. The confrontation between them heats up until Jaime decides to run. Furious, he jumps on his horse and bolts through Cumberland Forest, forcing Arthur to chase after him. What starts as a simple rescue attempt quickly turns into something much more serious. During the escape, Jaime shows a desperation far greater than Arthur expected, and when he finally runs out of options, he makes an extreme choice by threatening to take his own life. It's up to the player to stop the tragedy with one of the most memorable shots in the whole campaign, hitting Jaime's revolver at the exact moment he tries to point it at himself. It's a quick scene but incredibly revealing, because for the first time we realize the problem was never just the Colonios. Jaime wasn't looking for a religion, he was looking for a place where he felt he belonged. And after what happens, the whole mood changes. Away from the cult's influence and finally calmer, Jaime agrees to head back to Valentine, alongside Arthur, and it's during this ride back that we get some of the most important insights about Arthur's relationship with the Gillis family. Still shaken by everything, Jaime asks if he was a fool for following the Colonios. Arthur doesn't judge him. On the contrary, he says there's no shame in searching for a better world. It's an interesting answer because, in a way, it also reflects Arthur himself. After all, throughout his life, he was chasing some version of a better world, even if he almost never knew exactly where to find it. Shortly after, Jaime admits he missed Arthur and asks something that probably a lot of players would want to ask at that moment if he and Mary had gotten back together. And Arthur's answer is brief. He just says that's all in the past. But Jaime's very question reveals something important. For anyone who knew them before the split, Arthur and Mary seemed made for each other. As they keep riding, Jaime recalls that it was Arthur who taught him how to ride when he was a kid. A seemingly simple detail, but one that reinforces something we've seen before. Arthur wasn't just Mary's boyfriend. For years, he was part of that family. And the conversation also reveals another important aspect of Jaime's life, his troubled relationship with his father. Jaime admits he grew up hearing that he'd never be good enough, that he'd never be a real man, that he'd never achieve anything worth mentioning. It's not hard to see why someone in that situation would end up looking for acceptance wherever they could find it. And interestingly, Arthur's response is almost fatherly. He criticizes Mr. Gillis, stands up for Jaime, and tries to convince him that there's still a future ahead. Throughout the conversation, we also find out that Jaime keeps reminiscing about the old days. He asks about Dutch, Hosea, and other names that were part of Arthur's life years before. And when he mentions the death of some of these people, he ends up reaching a painful conclusion. Maybe Mary made the right choice by walking away from that life. And Arthur doesn't argue, doesn't try to justify his choices. He doesn't try to convince him otherwise. He just stays quiet, maybe because deep down he was already starting to think the same thing. And when they finally get to Valentine Station, Mary runs to hug her brother. The relief is immediate. Jaime agrees to go back home, and for the first time since the story began, there seems to be a bit of peace for the Gillis family. And before boarding the train, Mary thanks Arthur for everything he's done. They exchange a few words, and for a brief moment, the couple who once dreamed of building a life together appears again, but the moment doesn't last long. As she says goodbye, Mary says something that perfectly sums up why their relationship failed.
Oh, you'll never change. I know that.
And the curious thing is, there's no anger in that sentence, no contempt, no resentment, there's only resignation. And like someone who finally accepted a truth they'd been denying for years, Arthur stands still on the platform watching the train cars disappear into the horizon. Then alone, he makes one of the most honest reflections of his entire story.
I feel like the luckiest man alive, and I feel like a fool. That woman confuses me and plays me for a fiddle like no one else alive. I trust I will not make a god-awful fool of myself once more, but somehow I imagine I shall.
And this reflection totally makes sense because that was always the core of his relationship with Mary. She was the person who brought him the most happiness, and also the one who made him realize everything he had lost. At that moment, Arthur believed it would be just another goodbye, but fate had one more reunion in store for them, because months later, during the events at Shady Belle, a new letter would arrive in Arthur Morgan's hands. And the curious thing is, even before we read that second letter, there's a detail most players miss. During the scene that happens right after the mission, The Gilded Cage, Arthur wakes up hungover with Dutch entering his room. While he's trying to pull himself together, we see the patriarch find Mary's letter by the bed. He quickly reads a few lines and then just tosses it on the table before leaving the room. It's a super brief moment, but it says a lot about how Dutch saw Mary. And after Dutch leaves, Arthur finally picks up the letter to read it. This time, the tone of the message is very different from the first one. Mary starts by thanking him for the help with Jaime. She says that he and their father are still arguing, but there's hope that the boy will go back to school, finish college, and rebuild his life. Then, however, the letter takes on a much more personal tone, maybe the most personal of all the messages they've exchanged. Mary reflects painfully on herself, admitting she's spent her whole life making mistakes and wonders why she never became the woman she wanted to be. But right after, she turns that same question to Arthur. Why did he never change? Why could he never let go of the fantasies that clouded his judgment? This is an extremely important passage because it shows that even years after they broke up, Mary is still trying to understand exactly what destroyed their relationship. And at the end of the letter, she reveals she got herself into another mess. She doesn't go into much detail, just admits she needs help again, and despite the shame she feels asking for favors once more, there's no one else to turn to. Once again, Arthur was her last option, or maybe her only option. And there's something almost melancholy about that, because every time Mary's life goes off the rails, she ends up coming back to the same man. The man she never managed to forget, the man she believed could save her, and just like before, Arthur doesn't take long to reply. After reading the letter, he leaves the camp, saddles up, and heads towards St. Denis, not knowing that this reunion would put them face to face with the question they'd spent years trying to avoid. Is there still a future for Arthur Morgan and Mary Linton? Upon arriving at the Grand Hotel in St. Denis, Arthur is greeted by a scene that probably caught the attention of many players. From the hotel's second floor, Mary waves to him from the balcony and calls his name. And even years after their breakup, she's still an incredibly beautiful and elegant woman. It's easy to see why some men passing by on the street were throwing glances her way. As soon as they're face to face again, we notice an important difference compared to their first meeting. The nervousness is still there, but the distance between them isn't the same anymore. After everything they've been through since the Jaime incident, the conversation flows much more naturally. It's like little by little they're relearning how to be part of each other's lives. But this feeling doesn't last long because Arthur soon finds out the real reason he was called to St. Denis. The reason for the request was her father, and Arthur's reaction is immediate. Even before Mary can explain the situation, he's already starting to back away. The way he responds makes it clear that this was the last person he expected to help. After all, we're talking about the man who spent years trying to keep him away from Mary, the man who never believed Arthur was worthy of his daughter, and the man who saw him as nothing more than a hopeless criminal. The conversation that follows might be one of the most honest in their entire relationship. Mary tries to defend her father, arguing that he just wanted something better for his daughter, but Arthur sees the situation in a completely different light. To Arthur, that was always just a polite way of saying he was never good enough.
I know Daddy was not kind to you, but surely you cannot hate a man for the sin of loving his daughter and wanting better for her than
me?
than the choices you make.
What choice did I have?
And for the first time, we see this hurt come out so clearly. Years after the breakup, Arthur still carries the feeling that he never really had a chance to be accepted by Mary's family. The conversation gets even more interesting when Mary suggests that Arthur could have taken a different path, that he could have left that life behind, that his choices led him to that point. Arthur, however, seems to see his own story very differently. From the way he responds, it's clear he doesn't believe he had the freedom Mary thinks he did. He sees himself as someone shaped by circumstances and decisions made long before that moment, and maybe that's exactly where the two of them never managed to understand each other. Mary believed Arthur could have chosen a different life. Arthur wasn't so sure about that, and the argument keeps escalating. Arthur reminds her that the life Mary chose for herself didn't exactly bring the happiness she imagined either. Jaime almost ruined his own life. Her father was still sunk deep in drinking, gambling, and other vices. And now, once again, she had to turn to the man all those people had considered unfit. It's a harsh reaction, maybe even unfair at times, but also understandable, because Arthur wasn't just arguing about Mr. Gillis. He was unloading years of resentment he never got the chance to express. And then Mary asks for just one thing, that he be kind to her. It's a small moment, but it completely changes the direction of the conversation. Arthur realizes he's no longer arguing with her father, he's arguing with Mary, and he immediately lets his guard down. For the first time since they met in St. Denis, they put aside the accusations and start talking honestly. Mary admits maybe she should have looked for someone else, but she didn't. And that says a lot about their relationship, because whenever her life goes off the rails, Arthur is still the first person who comes to her mind. And shortly after, Mary makes an important confession. She admits the problem was never a lack of love. It wasn't because she stopped loving Arthur that she left. And Arthur doesn't show any surprise hearing that. The way he reacts makes it clear this was a truth he'd known for a long time. And the conversation keeps getting more intimate. Mary talks about how their lives could have been different, about the choices they made, about the years they lost, and Arthur admits he thinks about it often, maybe more than he'd like, because even after everything that happened, a part of him still feels stuck in that life that never was. And in the end, Mary asks for help once again. And just like with Jaime, the game lets us either refuse or accept the request. But once again, the most accepted interpretation by the community is that the canonical choice is to help. Not just because the story goes that way, but because everything we've seen so far points to the same conclusion. Arthur simply can't ignore a request coming from Mary. And after a few moments of resistance, he finally gives in, and for the second time in the story, decides to help her. But before heading out to find Mr. Gillis, a brief conversation reveals something curious.
Oh, Arthur, I should have ran away with you years ago.
Well, you wouldn't.
No, I didn't. But, well, I don't know.
It's a short dialogue, but it perfectly sums up their relationship. Both imagined a life together, both wanted a life together, but when the time came to choose, neither of them could take the step needed to make it real. Still, there was a father to find and a new problem to solve. Arriving at the town stable, Mr. Gillis's last known location, Mary goes inside to try to gather more info, while Arthur waits outside. And it's exactly at this moment that Rockstar gifts us with one of the best comedic reliefs in the whole campaign. While waiting on the sidewalk, Arthur is approached by an extremely arrogant employee who demands he get off the sidewalk. The result is an interaction that's as unexpected as it is funny, showing exactly the kind of patience Arthur has for dealing with pushy, clueless people.
I said, just get out of here!
Listen, partner. I'm waiting on the lady. She's a fine lady. She's just gone inside. If I wasn't waiting on this lady, you'd be dead already. But if you continue to irritate me, I'll kill you. I make my apologies to the lady. It's your call.
Oh, I didn't mean nothing.
Luckily for the employee, the situation ends with just a scare, but the comic relief doesn't last long because shortly after we see Mr. Gillis stumbling out of the stable completely drunk while Mary tries to convince him to go back home. Stubborn, proud, and clearly wasted, he brushes off his daughter without a second thought and continues down the streets of St. Denis. Suspicious that he might be hiding something, Arthur and Mary decide to follow him from a distance. And it's right during this chase that one of the most memorable moments of their entire relationship happens. At one point, Mary notices Mr. Gillis is about to look their way and pulls Arthur close so they won't be seen. And for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. The ex-couple was closer than they'd been at any other time since they reunited. The setting was perfect, and so was the silence. For a brief moment, it felt like years of separation, regrets, and missed chances simply didn't exist, but their lives had always been marked by paths that almost completely crossed without ever reaching the destination, and once again, that moment passed before either of them had the guts to turn it into something bigger. After that, the two keep following Mr. Gillis through the city streets, and it's during this part that one of the funniest and most controversial interactions in the game happens. Because no matter if Arthur's covered in mud or dressed like a proper gentleman, Mary almost always finds a way to complain about how he looks, which, let's be honest, is pretty annoying, especially considering everything he's done for her. And Arthur's response always fits the situation perfectly.
You could have cleaned yourself up a bit.
I didn't realize I was here to impress anyone.
Eventually, Mr. Gillis reaches his destination. Arthur and Mary watch from a distance, not exactly sure what's going on or what to expect, but the truth turns out to be way worse than they imagined. It's not about a lover, it's not about a bet, and it's not just another drinking binge. Mr. Gillis is trying to sell the brooch that belonged to Mary's late mother, a family heirloom, an item with huge sentimental value, and one of the few memories she still had of her mother. Alcoholism and gambling addiction had pushed Mr. Gillis into such a deep level of desperation that he was willing to sell even what didn't belong to him. And when Mary realizes what's happening, she immediately steps out of the shadows to confront him. She demands answers, demands he give back the brooch, and the situation quickly turns into an argument. But things get even worse when Mr. Gillis realizes Arthur is there. Old wounds are reopened and old judgments come back to the surface. For a few moments, it feels like nothing has changed since the time he tried to stop their relationship, bringing that whole argument about choices, love, and regrets back up again. And with zero interest in hearing any of that, Arthur makes a decision. If he can't fix Mary's dad's problem, at least he can get back what was taken from her. So he goes after the buyer, trying to recover the brooch. Right then, the game gives us two options. The first is to buy the jewel back, paying the outrageous price the loan shark demands. The second is to handle it the way many players probably find more satisfying, punching the guy out and getting the brooch back without spending a single cent. And I don't know about you, but I never pass up the chance to dish out some free justice to a slimy loan shark.
$25, that's my final offer. Take the damn thing. You crazy son of a bitch. You don't know who you're messing with.
Returning to Sandena, the brooch finally goes back to where it should never have left. With the jewel recovered and the problem solved, the worry about his father seems to take a back seat, at least for a little while. And it's right then that something different happens. For the first time since coming back into Arthur's life, Mary doesn't ask for help with a problem, doesn't ask him to find someone, doesn't ask him to face any danger. She simply asks if he'd like to spend some time with her, and the invite couldn't be simpler, a trip to the theater. And at that moment, the game puts us in front of a choice. We can say goodbye to Mary and move on, or we can accept the invitation. And when we say yes, we end up living one of the most important moments in their entire relationship, because for a few hours, Arthur stops being Dutch's right-hand man, stops being an outlaw, and stops being a man haunted by his own past. He just becomes Arthur again, a man walking the streets of St. Denis alongside the woman he loved his whole life. On the way to the theater, they talk, joke around, tease each other, and feel like a couple that never truly stopped existing. At the theater, they watch the shows together, make comments, laugh at each other, and enjoy something that, for most people, would seem completely ordinary. But for Arthur, it was something rare, and that's exactly why this ends up being one of the most human scenes in the entire game. And when the show finally ends, they're both forced to face a question they'd been avoiding for years.
Is it too late for us, Arthur?
I can't lie to you. I'm a wanted man, Mary. If anyone close to me, well, they're wanted too, and I can't have you wrapped up in there. But it's coming to an end. This time it really is.
Run away with me, Arthur. Run away right now and don't look back.
I want to. More than anything, I want to. But I've got some people I need to take care of. Once they're free, then I'm free. Then I can disappear.
But Arthur...
If we're gonna run away anywhere, we'd need money. And soon, I'll have some.
I know you won't run away. But it's a pretty dream.
Very pretty, but I will once I get some money. I had some, but then some fool got it trapped into a town that I can't go back to. That's another story.
I'll write you.
This is without a doubt one of the most painful scenes in all of Red Dead 2. After years apart, missed connections, regrets, and lost chances, Mary finally lays all her cards on the table. She's not talking about the past, not about the mistakes they made, or everything that went wrong. She simply offers Arthur the chance to build the life they both always dreamed of. A new life away from the gang, away from the trouble, away from it all. And for the first time in the whole story, that future that seemed impossible feels within reach. And that's exactly why Arthur's answer hurts so much. Because he doesn't say no for lack of love, quite the opposite. The way he talks makes it clear that running away with Mary is the one thing he wants most at that moment, but he believes he still has a responsibility to fulfill. He knows his story is coming to an end. He understands how serious the gang's situation is and his illness. He knows everything is falling apart, and before thinking about himself, he decides to think about the people who depend on him, mainly John, Abigail, and Jack. Many players see this scene just as another tragic moment between Arthur and Mary, but it also represents something bigger. It marks the moment when Arthur finally puts others before himself. Years ago, when their relationship ended, Arthur chose the gang because he couldn't leave that life behind, but now the situation is different. This time he doesn't choose the gang, he doesn't choose the outlaw life. He stays because he believes he can still do some good before it's all over, because he believes he can still help some people achieve the freedom he never found himself. And that's exactly what makes this scene so sad, because for the first time in his life, Arthur finally became the man Mary always wanted him to be. But that moment came too late. Shortly after, Mary boards the streetcar and disappears into the streets of St. Denis. And when she leaves, it feels like that was the last goodbye. But their story wasn't over yet. Because sometime later, during the events of Chapter 6, something important would come into Arthur's hands at Beaver Hollow. Mary's last letter. But along with the letter, Mary returns something important to Arthur: the engagement ring and a photo of them from their youth, the same ring he gave her many years before, back when they still dreamed of building a life together. And the most striking thing is that Mary kept that ring all those years, even after they broke up, even during her marriage to Mary Linton, even after everything that happened between them. In a way, that ring represented a hope she never fully gave up on, the hope that Arthur would change, the hope that someday they'd finally find a way to be together. But after St. Denis, something changed. When Mary asked Arthur to run away with her, he said no, and from her point of view, that was the definitive answer she'd been looking for all those years. In the letter, Mary admits she was starting to dream again. Simple dreams. Silly dreams, as she puts it. Dreams of a future by Arthur's side. But she finally understood what she had tried to deny for years. When she was with Arthur, everything seemed to make sense, but when she was away from him, she could clearly see that the life he led was a life she could never escape. Mary also apologizes for the past, for the mistakes she made, and even for reaching out to Arthur again after all those years. But maybe the most painful part of the letter is when she admits there's a good man inside him. A man she always saw. A man she fell in love with, but one who was constantly fighting something much bigger and most of the time losing that battle. That's why she decides to return the ring, not because she stopped loving him, but precisely because she loved him too much, because that little object kept reminding her of Arthur every day, kept feeding a hope she could no longer carry. And for the first time in their entire story, Mary decides to move on. And with that, one of the most tragic relationships in the entire Red Dead universe comes to an end. Or at least that's what it seemed like, because even after the goodbye, even after the letter, and even after returning the ring, there was still one last farewell, one final proof that Arthur Morgan never stopped holding a special place in her heart, and it would happen shortly after in front of a simple gravestone during the closing credits. And it's during the end credits that we find the final piece of this story. Long after the events of the campaign, Mary shows up at Arthur's grave, silent, alone, crying. It's a brief scene, but it says more than any letter or dialogue ever could. And after everything that happened, after the farewell in St. Denis, after the last letter, after returning the ring, Mary still finds her way back to Arthur. Maybe because some stories never end the way we want them to. Maybe because some people just leave marks too deep to ever be forgotten. And there's a behind-the-scenes tidbit that makes this moment even more special. Since the actress Julie Jesnek, who plays Mary, wasn't available the day this scene was filmed, the motion capture was actually done by Roger Clark himself.
Here's another fun fact. Spoiler alert. At the very end, when the credits are rolling, after you've completed the epilogue as John, and you know those little montage bits that they have, and there's one where you see Mary visiting Arthur's gravestone. You guys remember that part? I was Mary. Yeah, I milked that one. And of course, the real Mary, Julie Jesnek, was amazing to work with. But she, you know, she wasn't in that day. So, Raj, do you mind standing by your gravestone and looking sad? Yeah, sure.
It's a technical detail that few people know about, but it carries a curious symbolism, because in a way, Mary's final goodbye also had Arthur's own involvement. And there's something deeply sad in that image, because for years the two of them tried to find a moment where they could finally be together. When they were young, Arthur couldn't leave the life he led behind. Years later, when the chance came again, He believed there was still time. Time to make money, to help the people who depended on him. Time to make money, to help the people who depended on him. Time to fix everything before finally being free. But that time never came. Arthur Morgan didn't lose Mary to another man. He didn't lose Mary to distance nor to a lack of love. Arthur lost Mary to the very life he chose to live. And maybe that's the real tragedy of their story. Because they truly loved each other, but there was always something standing between them and the life they dreamed of building. First came choices, then duty, and finally fate itself. But there's a detail in this story, a detail that turns a sad memory into something much more beautiful. The ring Mary gave back to Arthur was the same ring that stood for years of hope, regrets, and missed chances, a symbol of a love that never quite found its moment. But that ring didn't disappear with Arthur. Sometime later, John Marston uses that very same ring to propose to Abigail, and in a way that gives a whole new meaning to everything, because what once represented an unfinished story ends up helping another story reach the ending Arthur and Mary never could. And maybe that's exactly why this relationship is still so remembered by fans today. Not because it was perfect, not because it had a happy ending, but because, just like so often happens in real life, it was a true love that showed up at the right moment, just too late. Now I want to hear your opinion. Do you like Mary as a character? Do you think she was right to walk away from Arthur? Or do you think she gave up on him too soon? This is one of the oldest debates in the entire Red Dead Redemption 2 community, and I'd love to read your thoughts down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this more documentary-style narrative format, I've got the perfect recommendation that fits this story perfectly. In the next video, I'll tell the story of one of the most humiliating moments in Arthur Morgan's life. There, I dive into the whole plot involving Jeremiah Compson and show how Arthur ended up being tricked by the devil himself in one of the most impactful and symbolic events in the entire game. It's one of those stories a lot of people know about, but few really understand what went down behind it. So if you're curious to find out all the details, just click right here on the side on the yellow arrow and watch the video. We'll catch up again in a few seconds. Big hugs to everyone and see you soon. Bye!